Every year, around 21 million Americans, which is about 8.4% of the adult population, experience a major depressive episode. Among teenagers, it's worse. 15% of adolescents, nearly 4 million kids, report struggling with depression. And if you're a young adult aged 18 to 25, you're in the most vulnerable group. 17% of people your age suffer from major depression annually. Now zoom out to the world. Globally, 4.4% of the population battles depression every year. That's hundreds of millions of people. And depending on where you live, the lifetime risk of developing major depressive disorder ranges anywhere from 8 to 18%. This isn't a niche issue. This is the epidemic of the modern mind. And in the face of all that pain, we were told one simple story. If you're feeling depressed, anxious, or emotionally off, it's because your brain chemistry is broken. Your serotonin is low. But don't worry, we have pills to fix that. It sounded scientific, reassuring, neat. But according to journalist Johann Hari and many other researchers, it was never science. It was a marketing campaign, a story that turned your suffering into their sales. Journalist Johann Hari, in his book Lost Connections, recalls asking his doctor why he felt so low. The response? Some people are just born with low serotonin. You're clearly one of them. All you need is drugs. That moment, so familiar to millions, was a turning point, not just for Hari, but for how we understand mental health. Because when you dig into the actual science, the chemical imbalance theory starts to fall apart. In fact, one major review concluded that the serotonin theory of depression is not empirically substantiated. In plain English, there's no convincing evidence that depression is caused by low serotonin, and yet over 85% of the public still believes it. Why? Because it was sold to us. Pharmaceutical giants flooded the world with messages like "correct a chemical imbalance." These were not just harmless slogans, they shaped cultural understanding. Schools started teaching kids that depression is just like diabetes. Doctors repeated the story without evidence. Mental illness became a matter of bad brain chemicals, and pills were marketed as magic fixes. But this wasn't a conclusion drawn from hard evidence. It was a billion-dollar strategy. In truth, as psychiatrist Dr. Joanna Moncrieff makes clear, we found no convincing evidence that depression is connected with low serotonin, let alone caused by it. Her research dismantles the very foundation of this narrative. Even the American Psychiatric Association, in a lesser-known 1979 statement, admitted that psychiatric disorders result from a complex interaction of physical, psychological, and social factors. But those complexities never made it into the headlines. What sold was simplicity, and simplicity sells pills. And here's where the damage deepens. When people believe they're biologically broken, that they have a permanent defect in their brain chemistry, it changes how they see themselves. Research shows that patients who adopt this chemical imbalance belief tend to feel more hopeless, less empowered, and are less likely to seek therapy or make lifestyle changes that could actually help. They become passive, waiting for a pill to fix what they've been told is unfixable on their own. This lie robbed millions of agency, of context, of deeper understanding. It reduced complex emotional pain rooted in trauma, disconnection, loneliness, stress, to faulty wiring. It replaced healing with sedation. So let's be clear. The idea that depression and anxiety are simply caused by low serotonin is not settled science. It's a story crafted by an industry that profits off your pain. And once you see the cracks in that story, you start to ask bigger, more honest questions. Not just what's wrong with me, but what happened to me? And maybe more importantly, what have I been told that isn't true? This is where we begin, by tearing down the myth that suffering is just a matter of chemistry gone wrong. Because if you were sold a lie, you deserve the truth. It all began in the 1950s, almost by accident. Doctors noticed that a tuberculosis drug called iproniazid seemed to lift patients' moods. Around the same time, another compound, imipramine, originally tested as an antihistamine, was found to reduce symptoms of depression. These drugs happen to affect neurotransmitters like serotonin and norepinephrine. This led some researchers to ask, could low levels of these chemicals be causing depression? It was a hopeful hypothesis, not a proven fact. As psychiatrist David Healy and researcher Patrick Coppin would later note, this was speculation based on observation, not hard data. Small studies tried to measure serotonin metabolites in the brains or spinal fluid of depressed patients, but the results were weak, inconsistent, and riddled with methodological flaws. Even decades later, no test, scan, or biomarker could reliably confirm that depressed people had too little serotonin. Still, the theory was too seductive to let go. By the 1960s and 70s, the serotonin hypothesis gained traction, not because it was scientifically confirmed, but because it offered a simple explanation for a deeply complex human experience. And when Big Pharma entered the picture in the 1980s, simplicity became a selling point. Enter the age of SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Prozac, launched in 1987, was the first blockbuster antidepressant. But to make it a commercial success, pharmaceutical companies needed more than a pill. They needed a story, a hook, a way to explain why someone should take it. And so, the narrative was born. Depression is caused by a chemical imbalance in your brain. Our drug corrects that. One former pharmaceutical ad writer later confessed, "Depression was sold to us as a simple problem of serotonin insufficiency, a convenient narrative that made drug companies very rich. It was, as researchers bluntly concluded, a marketing necessity." By the 1990s, this messaging became inescapable. Zoloft commercials told viewers that depression may be due to a chemical imbalance and that their pill works to correct it. Academic journals were infiltrated too. In 1991, Eli Lilly, the makers of Prozac, funded an entire psychiatry journal supplement to publish articles promoting the serotonin theory. The kicker? Even in those papers, the link between serotonin and depression was described as hypothetical. But those doubts never made it into the ad copy. This myth didn't stay confined to pharma boardrooms. Doctors, trying to simplify things for confused patients, often used metaphors like, "Your brain is just missing some chemical messengers." Psychiatry textbooks echoed similar language. The term chemical imbalance became a helpful shorthand, and then, dangerously, it became gospel. Even patients began to internalize the idea. By the early 2000s, the phrase chemical imbalance became almost synonymous with depression. As one academic analysis observed, usage of the term exploded in books, media, and pharmaceutical leaflets, but only after the launch of SSRIs and their accompanying ad campaigns. The timing wasn't a coincidence, it was strategy. So let's be clear. The theory wasn't born in the lab. It wasn't confirmed by brain scans or blood tests. It was born from a guess and raised by marketing. This is how a metaphor became medicine, and how billions were made by convincing people they were broken in a way only a pill could fix. A Paxil pamphlet flatly stated, "Paxil can help restore the balance of serotonin." And who wouldn't want their balance restored? It sounded clinical, reassuring, scientific. But as the Irish Medicines Board eventually ruled, such claims were misleading and had to be banned. The science simply didn't back them up. Still, the myth spread like wildfire. Once direct-to-consumer drug ads became legal in the US, in 1997, pharmaceutical companies poured hundreds of millions into ad campaigns. Over 70% of surveyed patients reported seeing antidepressant ads in magazines or on television. These campaigns often anthropomorphized brain chemistry, cartoons of sad blobs missing serotonin, and ended with a call to action. Ask your doctor. But that was just the surface. Behind the scenes, Big Pharma played a much deeper game. They infiltrated the entire medical ecosystem. Drug companies sponsored continuing medical education seminars, paid psychiatrists to endorse their messaging, and even ghost-wrote articles in scientific journals. One infamous example: a 1991 issue of the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry appeared to be a peer-reviewed publication about serotonin, but was in fact a Lilly-funded supplement. Not subject to standard peer review, it included articles that themselves admitted the serotonin theory was hypothetical, yet the headlines shouted, "Role of serotonin in therapy of depression." It was, as one industry insider confessed, nothing but marketing. Even medical students weren't spared. Curriculums began to teach depression as a biological disease akin to diabetes. The analogy made complex mental health struggles sound as simple as insulin deficiency. But as Marcia Angel, former editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, warned, "The catchphrase chemical imbalance is not one I endorse. It hardly reflects the state of psychiatric neuroscience." And it wasn't just doctors. Patient advocacy groups were funded by drug companies. Disease definitions quietly widened. Normal emotional struggles, grief, stress, loneliness, were relabeled as clinical disorders needing pharmaceutical treatment. James Davies, a former Pharma copywriter, described how rival companies even became allies, collaborating to push the same message. Depression is a brain disorder. Medication is the answer. It was a rare moment of corporate unity, not for public health, but for market share. The result? A staggering increase in diagnoses and prescriptions. In England, antidepressant prescriptions tripled between 1998 and 2018. In the US, about 1 in 6 adults were on psychiatric medications by 2020. Globally, antidepressant use nearly doubled during the 2010s. This wasn't due to a sudden surge in mental illness. It was the result of marketing strategy that worked. And the strategy didn't just shape opinions, it reshaped reality. Treatment guidelines were influenced by industry-funded research. Millions have been misled into believing their sadness is purely chemical. That therapy won't help. That lifestyle, trauma, loneliness, or disconnection are irrelevant. And when pills don't fix them, many feel more broken than ever. But the question here is, what science says about this? Take this statement from a 2018 Umbrella review led by Dr. Joanna Moncrieff, a leading critic of modern psychiatry. It is always difficult to prove a negative, but I think we can safely say there is no convincing evidence that depression is caused by serotonin abnormalities. Let that sink in. One of the most widely accepted narratives in modern mental health, used to justify billions in drug sales, is based on a theory that has no empirical support. Other experts agree. Former NIMH Director Thomas Insel, who oversaw $20 billion in mental health research, confessed that the chemical imbalance model failed to move the needle on outcomes like suicide, recovery, or long-term well-being. In his own words, these disorders are not caused by brain malfunctions or chemical imbalances, and are not cured with pills. Even with all the technological advances and massive investment, he admits we were looking in the wrong place all along. Scientific reviews have tested nearly every version of the chemical imbalance theory. Serotonin levels in depressed people? Inconsistent. Serotonin metabolites in spinal fluid? Inconclusive. Lowering serotonin in healthy volunteers? Doesn't cause depression. Post-mortem brain scans? No consistent pattern. Even genome-wide studies found no link between serotonin-related genes and depression. In short, the serotonin theory of depression is not empirically substantiated, yet for years this idea was marketed as if it were fact. Drug companies leaned hard into it, pushing the idea that SSRIs correct a brain imbalance. But when you actually look at the drug trial data, the story shifts. Meta-analyses by Irving Kirsch and others show that placebos account for up to 80% of the antidepressant effect. In fact, many SSRI studies, especially the unpublished ones, show no statistical advantage over sugar pills. And if depression were just a chemical shortage, wouldn't the effects of medication kick in instantly, like insulin for diabetes? Instead, SSRIs take weeks to affect mood, suggesting the mechanism is far more complex. As neurobiologist David Healy points out, the drugs don't cure a chemical imbalance, they create one. His research even suggests that long-term antidepressant use may lower serotonin over time. The belief in a broken brain may do more harm than good. And this is what I am going to discuss now, how they hurt millions. Modern psychiatry, together with the pharmaceutical industry, has inflicted iatrogenic harm on millions of people. The moment people began to believe that mental illness was purely a biological glitch, the treatment paradigm shifted dramatically. Suddenly, pills weren't just an option. They became the first, and sometimes only, response. Doctors hearing "my serotonin is low" reached for the prescription pad. Patients stopped asking why they felt hollow and started asking what dose they needed. The narrative left little room for meaning, for trauma, for human complexity. When patients are told they have a chemical imbalance, they often assume something is fundamentally wrong with their brain. This mindset became self-fulfilling. If your brain is broken, what's the point in trying? Research shows that patients who believe this narrative feel more hopeless, more stigmatized, and less in control of their recovery. Women in particular, who endorsed the chemical imbalance idea, were found to have poorer health outcomes and prolonged symptoms. Why? Because they were conditioned to see themselves not as wounded humans needing connection, but as defective machines needing repair. Even more devastating is the disempowerment it breeds. Instead of trying movement, routine shifts, or community connection, many were told, "Take this pill, your brain is broken." But what if the brain wasn't broken? What if the story was? Dr. Joanna Moncrieff argues that the myth robbed people of informed consent. People deserve to know the truth, that we don't know exactly how antidepressants work, and that they can have serious side effects. Those side effects aren't rare. Millions have lived with sexual dysfunction, weight gain, insomnia, dizziness, and crushing withdrawal, many of whom were never warned. Some who tried to quit found the withdrawal so severe they were told they had relapsed, when in fact their body was adjusting to chemical dependency. This cycle, drug, withdrawal, re-diagnosis, more drugs, turned thousands into lifetime psychiatric patients. And this wasn't just data, it was personal. Take Eleanor Longden, for example. Diagnosed with schizophrenia after reporting auditory hallucinations, she was quickly labeled and medicated without anyone asking about her past. But Eleanor wasn't a broken brain. She was a traumatized soul. Only when she received trauma-informed therapy did she begin to heal. Her story echoes psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk's conclusion in "The Body Keeps the Score." Many symptoms we pathologize are the body remembering pain, not malfunctioning. There is nothing to heal, create, or fix. We are already whole. Millions were never told there was another path. That depression could be a messenger, not a malfunction. That their pain might have a story, not just a solution in a bottle. This isn't to demonize all medication. But the problem is the lie. The oversimplification that turned human anguish into faulty wiring and made pills the only cure. It's not just bad science. It's bad care. And in the end, this tidy myth left countless people misdiagnosed, misunderstood, and medicated, not healed. If the theory of a chemical imbalance is so thoroughly debunked, why does it still dominate headlines, prescriptions, and everyday conversations? The truth is quite unsettling, but it's not scientific confusion keeping the myth alive. It's power. The idea that depression stems from an imbalance of brain chemicals is seductive. It's simple, it sounds scientific, and perhaps most importantly, it absolves responsibility. Patients are comforted by it. "It's not me, it's my brain," becomes an emotionally relieving explanation. Even doctors, under pressure to provide quick fixes, have leaned into this narrative. When you've got only 15 minutes with a suffering patient, your low on serotonin becomes an easy script to reach for, so both literally and metaphorically. But this simplicity has a cost. As former editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, Marcia Angel noted, the chemical imbalance slogan hardly reflects the state of psychiatric neuroscience. It's not a scientific truth. It's a marketing slogan. And marketing works. For decades, pharmaceutical companies have spent billions embedding the serotonin myth into public consciousness. From glossy TV commercials to pamphlets in clinics to scripts pushed onto doctors by drug reps. Why? Because the myth is profitable. Once the chemical imbalance idea took root, it wasn't just a medical theory. It became a product. No lifestyle change required. No social reform needed. In fact, one PLOS medicine report revealed that the FDA, the very agency meant to protect the public, had never issued warning letters to companies promoting the serotonin theory in ads. Why? According to one internal reviewer, explaining the truth would confuse a sixth-grade audience. So instead, they let the lie slide. And it wasn't just the companies. Psychiatry, as a profession, also benefited. The biological model gave psychiatry medical legitimacy. Psychiatry started enforcing conformity under a medical mask. By labeling suffering as illness, the system disguised social control as compassion. The chemical imbalance theory wasn't just wrong, it was useful. It provided cover for institutions unwilling to address deeper issues like poverty, trauma, or isolation. As Michel Foucault wrote in Madness and Civilization, madness has often been society's way of outsourcing suffering. Treating depression as a matter of faulty brain chemistry means we don't have to fix broken homes, abusive jobs, or lonely cities. Foucault called this the false punishment of a false solution. Even now, with meta-analyses and neuroscience dismantling the serotonin myth, surveys show that a big percentage of the public still believe it, and many doctors still tell patients the same. Why? In part because they were taught it. In the early 2000s, college psychology textbooks openly included the imbalance idea as fact. One study found 90% of social workers relayed the chemical narrative to their clients. In short, an entire generation of professionals was trained, or conditioned, to repeat the myth. Dr. Joanna Moncrieff explained this perfectly. Most clinicians thought that the evidence base supported this theory, but it didn't. They were misinformed. Some psychiatrists, like Ronald Pies, now try to backpedal by claiming there has never been a causally based chemical imbalance theory officially promoted. But as psychologist Philip Hickey pointed out, that's disingenuous. Patients didn't invent the idea out of thin air. It was fed to them, repeatedly, by the very institutions now pretending it was never real. And let's not ignore human psychology itself. When someone takes an antidepressant and feels any improvement, placebo or otherwise, it reinforces the belief. The pill worked because I had an imbalance. That idea then spreads to friends and family. Online forums echo it. Social media amplifies it. The myth becomes self-perpetuating. As Dr. Sami Tamimi argued, the imbalance myth survives because it serves power. It allows pharmaceutical companies to profit, psychiatrists to retain authority, and society to sidestep painful truths about why people are suffering in the first place. In 2022, a group of Welsh psychologists co-signed an open letter that made it plain, depression is largely caused by our circumstances and the resulting impact on our bodies and psychosocial health. But admitting that would force us to confront hard realities: inequality, trauma, disconnection. So instead, the myth survives, because it's easier to say your brain is broken than your world is. But what really will help is nobody wants to hear, but I know many of you want to know, which I am going to discuss now. If depression isn't caused by a chemical imbalance, then what actually helps people heal? This is where the conversation gets real and hopeful. Once we strip away the myth, we can finally talk about what does work. And spoiler, it's not magic molecules in a pill. It's meaning, connection, safety, empathy. In short, it's what makes us human. Johann Hari tells a powerful story from Cambodia that captures this perfectly. A man lost his leg to a landmine and became deeply depressed. A Western doctor might have handed him an SSRI, but in his village, they gave him a cow, so he could farm again earn a living, and reconnect with his community. Within weeks, he recovered. As Hari puts it, he didn't need a chemical. He needed his life back. That story cuts to the core of a growing consensus in psychology and psychiatry. Depression is not a brain defect. It's often a signal of unmet needs. Needs for love, purpose, autonomy, or safety. When those needs are ignored or suppressed, the human system reacts not with a disorder, but with pain. As Carl Rogers once said, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." That's not neurochemistry. That's radical empathy. Rogers didn't see patients as broken machines to fix. He asked, "How can I provide a relationship which this person may use for his own personal growth?" And that mindset, the unconditional positive regard, is one of the most healing forces ever studied in therapy. Research consistently shows that the relationship between therapist and client is more predictive of recovery than the method itself. Irvin Yalom, the existential psychiatrist, took it further. He believed depression often comes from confronting life's deepest questions: death, isolation, freedom. His approach? Don't numb the fear. Use it. Life cannot be lived, nor can death be faced without anxiety, he wrote. But that anxiety can point toward an authentic existence. His goal wasn't to fix symptoms, but to help people find the courage to live fully. That's a far cry from telling someone their brain is broken. Trauma-informed care brings the same wisdom. Bessel van der Kolk, author of The Body Keeps the Score, shows that trauma isn't just a memory. It's in the nervous system. That's why traditional talk therapy doesn't always work. His work with EMDR, somatic experiencing, and movement-based healing helps people release trauma through breath, sensation, and safe connection. As he puts it, we can regulate our physiology, breath, movement, touch, and we can change the social environment so people can feel safe. Healing, in this model, doesn't come from correcting a molecule. It comes from restoring a sense of safety in the body and in the world. And then there's the lifestyle piece, often dismissed as soft by psychiatry, but it's actually backed by hard science. Sleep and nutrition matter too. Diets rich in fruits, veggies, and omega-3s can reduce inflammation and support brain health. As psychiatrist Julia Ruckledge put it, you cannot medicate a person out of a poor diet. You also can't medicate them out of a toxic life, which is why social support is so crucial. Loneliness, not serotonin, is a powerful predictor of depression. Engaging in meaningful activity, building relationships, joining groups, or simply being seen and heard can light up the very parts of the brain that medication tries to target. Some community programs have literally reduced depression rates just by helping people reconnect and find purpose. And that's the thread that runs through every effective approach: reconnection. Reconnection to the body, to relationships, to one's values and sense of meaning. When we treat people as humans, not broken chemical machines, healing becomes possible. And we don't need to wait for Big Pharma's permission. This doesn't mean meds are always bad, but let's be honest about what they are: tools, not cures, not chemical corrections. As David Nutt once joked, saying depression is caused by low serotonin is like saying headaches are caused by a paracetamol deficiency.